Well, I grew up in East Granby, Connecticut. I was an outdoor kid. I built tree houses, I built forts, I skated on ponds and skied in the woods. I was not a very good student, but I was a tinkerer and I loved building things. I'd make my own toys. I'd make skateboards. I'd make out of a pair of old roller skates. I made a unicycle out of my sister's tricycle once. I had freedom to do those kinds of things. There was nobody, telling me that I couldn't do anything. I could go down into the basement and play with my father's tools and make stuff. I did photography very early on. I had a Brownie camera, and I remember the first roll of film I took. The first time I went out with a camera by myself, unsupervised by an adult. I was about 9 years old, and I took a few pictures that, didn't pan out. But then it was winter time. I photographed a friend with a snowball, and then in the next frame I said, "Hey, Alan, throw that ball at Jimmy." And so I posed the two characters. He threw the ball. I caught the snowball in midair. And it was my first setup shot. One time I was in, class in high school, and I was doodling while the teacher was talking. And he grabbed the paper from my hand and he said, "Walter thinks he's going to be a famous artist someday." And I was embarrassed. It did the job. I tried to pay attention from that time on. But later on, the principal came to my class, pulled me out of class and said, "Could you do a mural for the town float?" This is straight out of Norman Rockwell, right? Painting it was a centennial for the town, and it was, to paint a mural. It was way beyond my expertise at the time, but I did it. I accomplished it. I went to Pear College of Art, and it was just right for me. Basically, there were two modes of photography we were learning. One would be photojournalism, in the very traditional professional style of photojournalism, and the other would be landscape photography in the manner of, Ansel Adams or Edward Weston, and, in the modernist tradition. And I did a little bit of a both, but it was really the landscape that I gravitated to. I love the idea that the 4x5, large format camera was a very slow, methodical process. And the subject I chose was the rivers and streams that I explored when I was a youth. They say of writers, you should write what you know. And I had the foresight to go to the place that I knew so well. And I was able to see it in a completely different way because I had this camera and this sort of formal idea of recording, whatever it was that inspired me. My first job was in Hartford, Connecticut. My job was processing film. And it was a commercial studio that had, a head photographer and another 4 of us employees. Each of us had processing jobs, but then each of us also did assignments for the head photographer as well. And that's where I really got to, get really very practiced with lighting and all that kind of thing. We moved to New York City after 5 years of being in that studio. And then I took a job in a photo studio there, and I was an assistant, and I was also able to do some of the photographic assignments myself. And after a year, we set up my own studio. Because I had done a lot of product photography, I first tried to, I figured that companies would need product photography. It would be kind of low-hanging fruit, it would be something that, they'd need and I could provide. And so I went out with my portfolio of product photography I had done over the years, including tear sheets out of magazines. And I got no response. And so I went back to the studio and started to experiment. And I took out, some old marbles that I had, some playing cards that I had, and I created these sort of gravity-defying pictures of objects floating in the air. And this is where my, childhood skills of tinkering and rigging came in handy. And that's how I kind of presented myself as somebody who could do special effects in photography. And I went out with this portfolio. They would take the thing out, look up at the light to see the transparency, and I got jobs right away. And because I was, some of these pictures were in, of game pieces. I discovered this games magazine on a newsstand in the subway. And so I brought my portfolio to them, with the game pieces floating through the air and everything, and I got a note in it, and it said, "Looks pretty good, keep in touch." And because I needed work, I couldn't just wait to come back a year later. So I went to the studio and I did an experimental photographic puzzle for them. I brought it to games, and my thought was it was just a teaser. It was a suggestion of what possibly I could do for them down the road. And they just bought it as a puzzle right then and there. And so that was a relationship that lasted 10 years. But I did a lot of other magazine work besides that didn't really relate to puzzles. And then one day I got a call from Jean Marzolo, who was an editor of Let's Find Out. It's a children's kindergarten magazine. And she had seen a picture I had done of little bits of hardware on a white background, which would later become the I Spy look. But her need was to do a similar photograph of fasteners for a kindergarten magazine that was to become a poster. And so I did this photograph for her, and it was a very successful poster. It was a fold-out thing that the teachers would put in their classroom. And I did a series of other posters for her. And they were very popular posters, and we had a good time doing them. It was a good assignment for me. But one of the editors at the book division of Scholastic saw the original poster we'd done. And Where's Waldo was popular at the time. So it was really Scholastic and this editor that had the idea of doing a search and find based on my style of photography. So they asked Jean if she would write it and I would do the photography. And that's how it started. Jean at first wrote I Spy rhymes, and I tried to, think about how I could do an illustration based on the rhymes, but because they're the least obvious things in the picture, I couldn't get inspired to work with the rhyme like that. So I said, why don't I just do some beautiful pictures and hide the objects, find the opportunities to hide objects within these pictures, and then make sure that there's some that rhyme, and then you write the rhyme. And that's how we ended up doing it. So it's the reverse of how children's books are usually done. These pictures took 3 to 4 days to do. And so that book was done very quickly. We were both surprised by the success of these books, and it was immediate. They signed me up for 3 more books before the first book came out. So they knew in advance that this thing was taking off. And I did the second book before I saw the first book in the stores. But there was also this, it was a new audience for me to have young children as being the audience of my pictures after, 18 years of doing pictures for commercial work and adult audiences, mostly adult audiences. And I was really taken aback by the intensity with which the readers devoured these books, but also the questions I started getting. And this was sort of key. They would ask me questions like, how did you get that to float through the air? And they seemed to intuitively know that photographs are based in reality, and therefore the objects in the picture should behave like that, like their own experience. And these questions are coming from kids that can't yet read. And it seems like to me that photography had a special kind of engagement with my readers, and that I wanted to kind of lean into that aspect of the work, so that my readers would be even more amazed, would be kind of subsumed by this sense of wonder about what's going on in the pictures. So instead of an improbable stack of blocks, I moved on to blocks that I used to create a machine that pops a balloon with 85 moving parts. So here we have a single photograph that has all these different toys and dominoes and marbles and plastic spoons and so on, that is composed to make a machine that creates a chain reaction of all these things falling down and eventually tripping a device that comes down and pops the balloon. It was one of the most thrilling pictures that I did for the I Spy series. It was like a need in me to want my readers to stay with my image. And the game of search and find is kind of the way I get them to examine every corner of the picture. But it's these other added value things like the optical illusions, the machines that pop a balloon, the imaginary kind of world building that I've done. Like, for example, creating this cities made out of blocks and toys, or cities made out of cardboard boxes, and so on. I want the search and find game to draw them into those worlds so that they feel like they're occupying them. A Drop of Water was, actually did that during the I Spy period. I had taken a break from doing the I Spy books, and I had started to collect 19th century books on science, and I became fascinated with very simple tabletop experiments. So I decided to just do a book on the behavior of water with tabletop experiments. So I had a high-speed photo of a drop going into a glass and creating its little perfectly round shape. I had soap bubbles with beautiful iridescent colors. I had a snowflake that I photographed, that full-size page, and very simple explanation of the transformations of water through temperature and various other different transformations. And it became a classroom classic, and it's still in print. And then much later on, I did A Ray of Light, which is a little bit more challenging, but I was using, just, again, it was all tabletop experiments with using real sunlight coming into the prism and creating these brilliant colors. Various experiments involving color and refraction and optics. And so the two are like a companion. When I did the books, I made them as best as I could. I make them to last as long as possible. I wanted them to be forever books. I didn't want them to just be of the moment.